Today on the Hobby Grotto, we're painting a Warhammer Fantasy Dwarf from 1984. I tell you, there's no better place to start than with the base coats. And with the clothing, I'm going for that classic Imperial Dwarf look of yellow, red and blue. Very bold colours, and very Middle Hammer, which is my inspiration with this piece. This dwarf is an old school miniature from 1984, possibly the oldest mini in my collection. And I absolutely love the design of these older dwarves. They're so characterful, so fun, and they just really represent that era of the hobby for me perfectly. I'm applying all these base coats with multiple thin coats, which is very important with the layering style, so don't forget to keep these paints lightly watered down. I'm also making sure to get the blue in these tiny clothing slits now, because that's going to be a nightmare to do later. For the skin, I'm adding a little spot of Screamer Pink to the Cadian Fleshtone here, just to give a bit more of a ruddy colour, which I think is very appropriate for dwarves, because I didn't have any Bugman's Glow on hand. But you can use that instead if you've got it. Because the other parts of the model are going to be nice and bright, I'm creating some contrast with a darker silver for the metal bits. Iron Warriors is probably my favourite colour for base coating any silver metal. It's a great paint, as well as some classic Rhinox hide for the straps, shoes, beard and other bits and bobs. Again, to create that contrast with the colourful clothing. Speaking of classic, the Nuln oil shade, can't go wrong. We'll build up the layers from these darkened base colours in the following stages of the process. But before that, let's sort out the eyes so we don't get white and black paint all over our lovely layers there. Always try and get the eyes sorted early on, much less stress that way. Now it's time for layers. Lots of layers, firstly with our base coats, because we don't want everything to be quite as dark as it is with the Nuln oil. But we're not repainting all of it here. It's important to leave all the darkened base coats around for the first level of shading. Not only that, but this base layer that I'm repainting, it's also going to help make our subsequent layers a bit more consistent and vibrant. All colours can benefit from this once over, but I don't always repaint smaller secondary colours like the brown on straps in this way, because even when hobbying, time is money. We've already got a nice base for the yellow with the XV88, and now we're going to start to layer on the Averland Sunset, the greatest of all GW yellows. Such coverage, such tone. Yellow is a tricky colour, but I often try to use it with my paint schemes because it looks so bold and spectacular. I'm bringing some more saturation to the colour with Yriel yellow. I often prefer a slightly more muted yellow, so I'm not going overboard here, but it's going to look brighter than it's going to end up with this colour, because later on, when I do some highlights mixed with white, it's going to tone the colour back down a bit. Yellow often requires more layers than other colours, so just be sure your paint's nice and thin for this stage. So GW have a great range of red paints, I reckon, which make this colour a breeze, so we're just working up here with Mephiston red. And this tunic is covered in texture, so it's nice and simple to paint. And then I'm hitting it with some Evil Sunz Scarlet to really punch up the vibrancy. This colour also has a bit of orange to it, which is the kind of red I'm going for. I want it to look nice and old school, very much a part of the aptly named red period. Hey, I just realised I forgot to paint the emblem on the shield. Better quickly fix that up. And this is one of the great things about using a wet palette. You've got all your previous colours there, ready to go to make any adjustments. Brilliant. If you're not using a wet palette, I really do recommend them. And there's a link as well in the video description if you want to check them out. I've mixed some Lothern blue with the Caledor sky to do another layer here. About 50-50. But always check these mixes on a small part of the mini first, just to check it's not too bright. Personally, I always usually mix a bit brighter because I keep my paints very thin, so just keep an eye on that. The shield had a texture on it too, so I'm just adding a little bit of stippling there. I want to keep the beard nice and dark. I almost don't want to highlight it at all really. It's looking kind of good with the Nuln oil wash, but we're going to bring back some colour with Rhinox hide. This is the main attraction for dwarves, so we have to give it a bit of love. And then I'm going to do some very sparing highlights with XV88, which is quite a few shades up from Rhinox hide, but I think for heavily textured things, this kind of jump works. You know, I always give the skin a lot of attention on a model because it's a focal point, particularly on the face. And no more so than on a model like this, where it's basically all face. I'm mixing the first layer of Kislev flesh with some Cadian Fleshtone, so it's not too much of a jump in colour. And I'm being careful to build this up with thin layers because you don't want any thick paint on faces, that's a no-go. Next up is pure Kislev flesh. I think on faces you can afford to be a bit more extreme with the highlights and really emphasise the details. Be really careful here not to hit the eyes with these layers. I do that a bit more than I'd like. Kislev flesh also has a bit more of a yellowy tone to it, so it's going to leave that more pinky kind of colour in the recesses. The final highlight on the face has some white mixed in with the Kislev flesh, and I'm keeping this to the most extreme points, not only on the face, but also on areas like the knuckles and the edges of the fingers. The hands are another focal point of the mini, so it's really important to give them some good highlights. I'm glazing some pink onto the nose now, and my big head is also coming to shot here again, so I was clearly not looking at my monitor. A simple little touch like this can add a lot of character to a model. Just make sure it's very thin, because you can always add more on, but difficult to take it off, particularly once you've highlighted the face. I usually do this in 3 or 4 layers, so if you barely notice anything with the first coat, that's a really good consistency. If you don't have contrast paint, you can use regular pink. Something like Screamer Pink would be a good match. Just use more medium in the mix and get it nice and thin. Final highlights, starting with some Ironbreaker for the metal. Edge highlighting is probably my least favourite part of the process because it's so fiddly, but you know, it's also nice seeing everything finally coming together. Pure Lothern blue here. And I always like to say with the final highlights, don't get carried away. You don't even really need them for tabletop standard minis, and it's really easy to get bogged down in this stage. I don't kind of highlight every surface and don't highlight every edge. I just kind of keep the highlights to the key edges. White mixed with yellow is great for emphasizing the detail of the clothing, particularly on this kind of old school slash clothing where you really want to get around those little edges, and it also tones down the saturation of the Yriel yellow while still providing a nice distinct highlight. The amount of white that you put in is going to kind of affect, you know, the end result, and depends on how muted you want it. Another option for yellow is you can actually highlight it with a bone style color, which is also going to give that muted effect. I don't want the red highlight to be too pale or pink, so I'm mixing some yellow with the Evil Sunz Scarlet, which is a great general practice for highlighting with red. If it turns out too orange in the end, you can always, you know, glaze it back with some red. I think it's easy to go too far when highlighting red, so just see how you go, but for me, a bit more of an orangey red's going to work better with this miniature anyway. As a final touch, I'm adding a few quick highlights to the brown areas, and mixing a bone colour in like this creates a nice faded effect for the leather. I'm keeping the highlights minimal on these areas though, because they aren't a focal point of the model. Never waste too much time painting boots, I reckon. My classic dwarf from 1984 is complete. What a fantastic miniature. The character of these old sculpts was just astounding, and I can't wait to have my entire dream army painted up in this scheme. One day. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial, as well as a potential trip down memory lane, and we'll see you next time on the Hobby Grotto.